The boardroom smelled faintly of burnt coffee and floor polish, a sterile stage for the moment I had been working toward for half a year. My palms were damp, but my voice stayed steady as I forced a smile. "I'm excited for my raise," I said, daring to let the words out. Across the long glass table, Victor Halberg didn't even glance at me. His silver cufflinks gleamed as he lifted his mug, lips curling into the faintest smirk. What raise I froze. The silence stretched until he gave a small nod to Michelle Fenton. The HR director. She slid a folder across the table with the kind of detached efficiency that made my stomach turn. At the top of the page, bold and undeniable salary increase approval. Ethan Caldwell. The blood drained from my face. "That's the Anderson contract," I managed, voice barely above a whisper. I brought that client in myself. Michelle's expression didn't flicker. "Your name was never on the list." Laughter broke the air. Ethan leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, his grin wide and smug. "Guess I forgot to tell you," he said, his tone carrying just enough mock innocence to sting. The words hit like a slap, but as my eyes flicked down the page, the twist revealed itself in cold black ink. Not only was Ethan credited, but the justification for his raise was my client, my pitch, my work. The theft wasn't subtle, it was calculated. Something inside me hardened. No tears, no begging, no fight they could later call unprofessional. I gathered my ceramic mug, my worn USB drive, and the small jade plant that had kept me company through every deadline. The room watched me rise. No one spoke, no one moved. I walked to the door, each step steadier than the last. What they didn't see as I slipped my tote over my shoulder. I also slid my leather folder inside. Inside that folder were receipts, draft proposals, signed notes, and my personal copy of the master contract for Anderson. Proof. Ammunition. I didn't leave empty-handed. I left armed, already thinking about my next move as the door shut behind me. The elevator doors slid shut behind me with a hollow thud, sealing away the smug faces I'd left in that boardroom. Not one person had followed me. Not a single voice had called my name. By the time I stepped out into the marble lobby, I might as well have been invisible. The security guard barely glanced up from his phone as I crossed the turnstiles. The cold air outside bit at my skin as I walked toward the subway. Tote bag pressed tightly against my side. Inside it, the folder pressed back, heavier than it had ever felt before. I wasn't walking away empty. I was carrying an arsenal, back at my Brooklyn apartment. I cleared the kitchen table and laid everything out. Draft proposals written in my hand. Progress reports with Ethan's signature scrawled across them but my words inside. Slack screenshots where he'd pleaded. "Can you reword this so I sound more technical?" I sorted them into neat stacks, labeling each with yellow sticky notes. My jade plant sat at the center of the chaos, calm and green against the spread of paper. I touched its leaves lightly. They erased me from the list. I murmured, "Now I'll write my own." 2 days passed. Silence. No phone call, no email, not even a hollow HR exit interview. It was as though I had never existed. Ethan, meanwhile, posted a gleaming selfie on LinkedIn grateful for leadership recognition. Hard work pays off. The comments flooded in. "Well-deserved, proud of you." Next stop, CEO. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, then hit print. The page slid out, his grin frozen in ink. I added it to my evidence folder. Each night, my collection grew. USB backups of the codebase I'd authored, invoices with my name buried in metadata. And one more thing, an overlooked gap. Halberg Systems had never bothered to make me sign an NDA. I hadn't been important enough. That was their first fatal mistake. By dawn, I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion humming under my skin. I didn't feel defeated. I felt dangerous. A week passed in a strange hush, the kind that pressed against my chest with every step. I walked the loop at Prospect Park with my earbuds in but no music playing, just the sound of gravel under my shoes and the echo of my own thoughts. No one had called. HR hadn't even bothered to send a generic farewell email. It was as if I'd never walked those halls, never pulled those all-nighters, never existed. The weight of years pressed down on me. I thought of the birthdays I'd skipped because a deadline couldn't wait, of the dinners I'd missed because Ethan couldn't manage a client call past 6 p.m. I remembered the countless times I'd stayed online at midnight, smoothing over mistakes before they became disasters. And one night in particular haunted me, the night Victor Halberg told the board that Ethan had secured the Anderson deal. I had been holding the original pitch deck in my hands, my name printed clearly across the cover. I had smiled through clenched teeth, knowing the lie but swallowing it anyway. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through LinkedIn. Ethan was already celebrating, bragging about his new accounts. My stomach twisted, but then I smiled bitterly. Those clients, they always called me directly. They trusted me, not him. My thumbs moved quickly. I won't be at Halberg anymore. When you're ready, you know where to find me. I sent it to one client, then another, and another. I didn't beg for loyalty. I planted quiet seeds, one by one. That night, back at my apartment, I opened a blank document on my laptop. Title, The Woman They Erased. My fingers hovered before I typed the first line. I built their platform, but they built their promotions on my silence. I stared at the words glowing on the screen. A tremor of power stirred inside me, but I didn't hit publish. Not yet. Timing was everything, and I intended to make every second count. I closed the laptop softly, already picturing the war room I would need to build. My apartment no longer felt like a home. It became a battlefield dressed in paper and ink. I covered the walls with post-it notes, each one a reminder: client names, contract dates, missed payments, false signatures. In the corner, a whiteboard carried a growing web of arrows and circles tracing Halberg's acquisitions. Every line leading back to the same truth: my work stolen, my name erased. From my leather folder, I pulled the Anderson deal papers. I traced my own handwriting in the margins, the notes I'd scribbled during the first pitch meeting. Ethan's raise had been justified with these numbers. This strategy, my work, his reward, proof of theft so blatant it burned in my hands. I opened a fresh spreadsheet on my laptop, column after column, left side the projects, middle who actually did the work, right side who claimed credit. The imbalance was staggering. I dropped in screenshots of Slack messages, Ethan's tone cloying and needy. Clara. Can you reword this to sound technical, Clara? Make this look like I coded it. His arrogance was laughable, preserved forever in digital ink. A soft knock interrupted me. Lila, my neighbor, leaned against the doorframe. She was an ex-designer turned freelance illustrator, always curious but never intrusive. Her eyes swept over the papers, the whiteboard, the chaos. You're building something, aren't you? She asked, voice low. I looked at her, lips curling into a thin smile. I'm building the truth. When she left, I returned to the folder, thumbing through my own contract. I paused at a clause about confidentiality: employees barred from discussing internal projects outside the company. My breath caught. HR had never filed my signed copy. I had asked about it once, and Michelle brushed me off with a laugh, saying the paperwork backlog was endless. That oversight now glowed like a weapon in my hand. They hadn't thought I was worth the effort. I slipped the contract into a separate file, labeling it in bold letters a loophole. Then I leaned back, satisfaction washing over me as I imagined their faces when they realized what they had left unguarded. The cafe in Tribeca was nearly empty when Arthur Myers slid into the booth across from me. He looked tired, his tie loosened, the kind of man who measured every word because each carried weight. He wrapped his hands around his coffee and said quietly, "Ethan hasn't returned our calls, honestly. We trusted you." My chest tightened. Not with fear, but with opportunity. I leaned forward. Then, trust me now. Arthur studied me for a long moment, then gave a single nod. That was all it took. Within a week, the logistics contract that had been the backbone of Hallberg's quarterly projections was quietly reassigned to Morales LLC. No announcements, no headlines, just a signature, discreet and final. One client down, but Hallberg didn't stay blind for long. Someone from inside leaked word of my move. I don't know if it was fear or loyalty, but a friend from my old office whispered in Ethan's ear. Suddenly, Arthur was fielding calls from him, Ethan's voice dripping with false outrage. He accused me of breach of contract, painted me as manipulative, claimed I was exploiting relationships built under Hallberg's name. Arthur nearly panicked. His legal team began drafting emails filled with disclaimers and apologies. My phone buzzed late into the night with his worried questions. I answered not with words, but with proof. The next morning, I sent him a packet every invoice I had authored, every project file with my digital watermark, Slack screenshots where Ethan begged me to polish his work until it looked presentable. The contrast was undeniable. Arthur called me directly. His voice was steadier this time. "We're staying with you. Ethan won't bother us again." He paused, then added with quiet conviction, "We're done with Hallberg." I ended the call, my hands trembling not from nerves but from the thrill of it. The first domino had fallen. That night, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, the city skyline glittering like a battlefield waiting for me to march across it. A month later, I stepped through the revolving doors of the Marriott Marquis with Arthur Myers at my side. The gala was Hallberg's playground polished marble floors, champagne glasses clinking, cameras flashing. My name wasn't on the guest list, but Arthur's was, and his arm linked with mine was my silent invitation. Across the ballroom, I spotted Ethan Caldwell standing beneath the glow of a chandelier, his voice carrying above the crowd. Record client retention. He boasted, chin high, a glass of scotch raised like a trophy. Beside him, Victor Hallberg nodded proudly, his smile wide for the cameras. I could almost hear the rehearsed sound bites, the performance of leadership. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I made my way through the clusters of people, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries. A whisper here, a small smile there. Old colleagues leaned in when I spoke, their eyes flickering with recognition, with something dangerously close to loyalty. And then it happened. A client, one of the largest on Hallberg's books, clapped a hand on my shoulder and said loudly, "Clara, you saved our integration project. We'd still be bleeding money if it weren't for you." The words cut through the room like broken glass. Heads turned, Victor's smile faltered. Ethan went pale, his glass trembling just slightly before he steadied it against his chest. The cameras didn't stop flashing, but the angles changed. The crowd shifted. For the first time, the spotlight was mine. I didn't need to say another word. My silence was louder than their speeches. Later that night, back in my apartment, I sat at my desk with the folder open. The dossier was complete falsified reports with Ethan's name on top, side-by-side comparisons of my work and his final drafts, Slack screenshots of his desperate requests for me to fix what he couldn't. I zipped the file and sent it not to Hallberg, not to Ethan, but to a journalist friend who had been chasing whispers of corporate theft for years. I didn't hit publish. I didn't have to. Some flames burn brighter when someone else carries the match. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the next morning, Ethan's triumphant LinkedIn post had vanished, replaced by silence where his smug grin used to be. Hallberg's board scrambled, demanding explanations. I imagined Victor trying to spin answers while auditors rifled through contracts and code logs. Every page another nail in Ethan's coffin. By midweek, word spread quietly Ethan had been removed from company Slack. No announcement, no farewell message, just gone. By Friday, his shiny new title had transformed into two pathetic words, open to work. Victor tried to stem the bleeding. He issued a statement calling it a miscommunication, then softened it to a leadership learning opportunity. The words were empty, the kind that corporate leaders lean on when the truth is too damning to admit, but no one was buying it. Not this time. That weekend. I opened my laptop and stared at the draft I'd been sitting on for weeks. My fingers hovered for only a moment before I hit publish. Title, The Woman They Erased. It spread like wildfire. Within hours, my inbox was flooded. Headlines multiplied across Twitter and news sites. She built it. He got the raise. The face behind the platform. How a woman's silence fueled a tech bro's rise. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was everywhere. Emails poured in not just from journalists, but from women who had been erased in meetings, interns whose work had been stolen, engineers told to smile while others took the credit. Some messages were brief, just a thank you. Others were pages long, stories of betrayal written with shaking hands. Reading them, I realized this fight was no longer just about me reclaiming what I had lost. It was about exposing the machine that made my erasure possible, the empire that fed off silence. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and let the noise wash over me. The battle with Ethan was done. The real war with Hallberg was just beginning. The cafe in Midtown was quiet enough that I could hear the scratch of Alana Ruiz's pen as she signed the last page. She slid the folder across the table with a steady hand, her eyes never leaving mine. Partnership. Funding. Full backing. She said, I think you'll know what to do with it. I flipped through the offer once more, though I had already memorized every line. It wasn't just support, it was ammunition. I signed without hesitation, my signature looping across the page like a blade cutting clean through. The funds hit my account within days. I moved quickly, quietly. 40% of Core Access Solutions was suddenly mine, a company that just happened to power the infrastructure Hallberg Systems depended on. It was like slipping the key into a lock that no one else realized existed. Weeks later, I walked through the glass doors of Hallberg again, not with a badge, not with a visitor pass, with a board seat. The conference room fell silent when I entered. Michelle Fenton's eyes widened as though she had seen a ghost. We didn't realize she stammered. I set my folder on the table and let the silence hang before answering. Neither did I said, smiling coldly, until I bought the room. The negotiations that followed weren't conversations. They were dismantlings. Victor tried to push for discounted rates, long-term assurances, a plea wrapped in polished words. I didn't flinch. Every proposal I made was strict, expensive, and non-negotiable. I watched their composure crack with each line item. By the time Michelle's pen scratched across the contract, her hands trembled so visibly she had to steady herself against the table. She couldn't even meet my eyes. I slid the signed copy back into my folder and stood, the weight of the paper heavy with victory. Hallberg had once erased my name from their list. Now their survival rested on my terms, and I had no intention of being merciful. I named it Morales Systems because I wanted every contract, every headline, every whispered story in the industry to carry my name. The company began in a co-working loft in Brooklyn, a space with peeling paint and coffee stains on the tables. But the energy inside was electric. I didn't hire for resumes polished with Ivy League gloss. I hired the ones who had been dismissed, overlooked, talked over the women with ideas scribbled in notebooks, the immigrants whose accents had been mocked in meetings, the interns who had once watched their work paraded under someone else's name. In Morales Systems, there was no invisible labor, no stolen credit. Every contribution was stamped with the rightful author. That culture became our foundation, and clients felt it immediately, within weeks. We launched our first product, built lean and fast, backed by the very clients Hallberg had taken for granted. Arthur Myers was the first to sign. Then others followed. Investors began circling, their curiosity shifting into open admiration. The press gave me a new name, the Queen who toppled tech bros. It was the headline that broke Victor. His email arrived in my inbox one morning, desperate and pathetic all at once. "We'd love to discuss bringing you back as a consultant. Just short term, of course. Happy to discuss compensation." I read it twice, laughing aloud before I typed my reply. "I wouldn't return if the building were on fire and you begged me to blow on the flames." The email leaked within hours. Screenshots flew across Twitter. HR blogs dissected every word. By the end of the week, Victor Halberg was no longer a leader, he was a cautionary tale, cited in seminars as an example of arrogance turned to ash. And Ethan. He disappeared altogether. No more posts, no more smug smiles, just the hollow silence of a man no one in the industry would touch again. While they unraveled, I kept building. Morales Systems wasn't just a company now. It was a movement, and I was just getting started. Months later, I stood beneath stage lights that burned warm instead of harsh, facing a sea of thousands at a national tech summit. The LED walls behind me stretched like billboards, my name displayed in bold letters. In the audience, I caught sight of Michelle Fenton sitting stiffly in the third row, her eyes lowered, her hands clasped in her lap. I adjusted the mic and let the room settle before I spoke. A year ago, I asked for a raise. They laughed. Today, I don't need a raise. I write the contracts. I sign the checks. The applause came fast, rolling like thunder through the hall. I held it for a moment, then lifted my hand, my voice cutting through the noise. To every woman who has been left off the list. Ignored in meetings. Written out of history, don't just fight for your seat. Own the building. The ovation that followed wasn't polite. It was fierce, a roar of release. I saw tears, fists in the air, heads nodding in recognition. Backstage, as I stepped away from the lights, Michelle approached, her voice tentative. "We'd like to rebuild." I didn't let her finish. Rebuild. As if I was the one who knocked it down. I walked past her without another word. That evening, I hosted dinner for my team. We crowded around a battered table in our Brooklyn loft, plastic cups raised, laughter spilling over pizza boxes. For the first time in years, I felt something like freedom. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, "You won. Clara, hope it was worth it." I set the phone down, turned toward the window, and looked out at the skyline that had once mocked me with its towers. It wasn't about winning, I whispered. It was about owning the ground they thought I should crawl on. The day they erased me from the list, I began writing my own, and this time, every name on it was mine to choose.